Welcome to the Sydney International Guest Speakers Meeting for adult children of alcoholic and dysfunctional families, held on the 14th of May 2023. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Ken F., who it's been a year since he last came and shared his experience, strength and hope with us. And it's always a pleasure to hear from Ken. And Ken will be talking, his talk for today is titled Demystifying ACA and the 12 Steps.
Thank you for welcoming me here and inviting me back. And thank you everybody for showing up and listening to me. I'm Ken. Today, I would like to talk about demystifying ACA sponsorship and the 12 steps. And I would like to start by talking about my solution. We read the solution, and I have my own paraphrased version of it. My solution is to become my own loving parent. I work a spiritual program based on action coming from love. The healing began when I risked moving out of isolation. I learned to keep the focus on myself in the here and now, and I take responsibility for my own life and supply my own parenting with gentleness, humor, love, and respect. I've been working in the recovery field for about 35 years now, and I am a licensed therapist, an author, and a YouTuber, and I have worked with a huge spectrum of individuals from inpatient therapy to outpatient therapy. And I know today, looking at the room, I'm talking with a lot of people that have a heap load of experience in ACA, and I'm sure there's some people out there that are new. And I want to demystify the 12 steps and ACA so that this is something that people can totally run to and feel safe with and benefit from. I'm going to go over a lot today, so if you guys want to take notes, you're welcome to. I'm sure I don't have all the answers, but if I can help you with some tidbits of information, then I will be very happy to help you guys on your journey. Today, I want to talk about my experience, strength, and hope from more of a professional point of view in helping people in recovery and how important the ACA process is for me as a therapist and the people that I work with. I believe that we do not grow when we are comfortable, and also when we are in distress. But I do think that we need to have a certain level of discomfort to push us into a place where we can grow. And if y'all can think about what got you into recovery in the first place, it probably was a very uncomfortable moment in your life. And keeping that in mind, I realized that my job is to make people feel uncomfortable. And hopefully I won't make anybody feel too uncomfortable today, as this isn't therapy, this is just information. I've always felt that ACA is the perfect companion for a therapist, because people come in to therapy or recovery for usually one primary purpose, and that's that people did not get the coping skills they needed, the love, the nurturing, the support, the guidance that they needed as a child. And they come into therapy to try to get the coping skills to recorrect that. And that's pretty much what adult children of alcoholics, or ACoA, is all about. For me, it's great when I have patients that are also in this fellowship, because they're doing the work in between sessions. I feel like the work that they do with me is just secondary to the amazing work that they do on their own. And when I work with people that aren't in a fellowship or aren't in ACA, their work tends to be a lot slower. They trip and fall more often. I just see more success with people that are working in the ACA fellowship. I work with a lot of people that are in NA and AA and all the other alphabet soups. And it seems to me like all roads eventually lead to ACA. One of my patients recently came back from an ACA meeting after attending AA for many, many months. And he said, I really like ACA because AA deals with the fruits, but ACA gets down to the roots. And I told him I was going to steal that, and I'm using it here tonight. But I like to talk kind of historically about where ACA came out of, because ACA is part of a metamorphosis of the 12-step fellowship that started all the way back in the 1930s with AA. And I think we really need to look at our roots and where we came from to understand, where we are now, how we got here, and where the fellowship is actually moving ahead. Alcoholics Anonymous is a little bit of a different fellowship than we are, because it primarily is to get people to stop drinking and to work with the ills and the horrors that come with alcoholism. And it started out in the mid-1930s with a group of people who were drunks trying to help other people get sober. And there were no steps in the beginning. It was very much doing house calls and sitting on somebody until they got better. And as soon as they got better, then just rushing them off to help the next person. And the steps came into play a few years later. And once again, there was an urgency and an immediacy with that. So when somebody was working the steps, basically as a sponsor, you would sit somebody down and you'd go over the steps with them, usually in maybe a matter of one evening. And then they would take this information and carry it forward to the next person. There was a lot of urgency and a lot of immediacy with the pacing, which is a lot different than ACA. And it's kind of interesting to see kind of how far we've evolved and why we've evolved from that. Al-Anon came out of AA because we had a whole bunch of spouses that were upset that their partners were getting sober and then were busy taking care of other people, and they needed support for themselves. So these two fellowships are the largest of the 12-step fellowships, and they are the most established. I think the reason being that they are so ingrained, not only that they've been around the longest, but also because they have had the literature, they've had the format, the traditions, and they also have had the concept of sponsorship very, very much ingrained in the fellowship. ACA came out of Al-Anon, as I think we all know. There were a bunch of teenagers back in the 1970s who came from Alateen to Al-Anon and did not feel very comfortable coming to Al-Anon and learning the principles there because they came with this big, huge hole in their heart. And Al-Anon, they didn't feel did anything to really address that hole. And at the core of ACA is abandonment. And it doesn't matter whether you were abandoned by somebody who was too busy in their alcoholism to spend time for you and nurture you, or somebody who was a workaholic, or somebody who was just emotionally not available for you. The core of ACA is having that sense of abandonment. In the beginning with ACA, it floundered. It floundered, it exploded, and then it kind of diminished a little bit. When it exploded, it didn't really have the big red book. It didn't have quite the literature. There was some good literature out there, but it didn't have quite the literature and format that it had today. And my understanding is that the hot pocket of ACA in the mid-1980s was in Orange County, California, where I stepped into a meeting, and I remember sitting in a room full of people holding teddy bears, doing nothing but crying and wailing, and not really talking much about anything. They were definitely involved in their pain, but I didn't see any healing coming out of that. I had a friend with me, and we ran out of there as quickly as we could. And I was very pleased to hear a few years later that things had changed. And I think it was 2006 that the big red book came around. And at that point in time, the fellowship really started to build itself. And I think one of the blessings with the pandemic has been that a lot of meetings have gone on the internet and have become virtual, and ACA has reached way more people than were available before. And I think a lot of people who were hesitant about actually going to a meeting were able to, in the comfort of their own home, log into a meeting, be a fly on the wall, listen, and get a good earful of recovery. And I really think the fellowship has grown much in the last 3 years. And I cannot tell you how excited I am about that. Most of us come into the program because we identify with some of the stuff that's going on in the laundry list. I always say that is the first place to start when you're entering our fellowship. is there anything on that list that you identify with? I know a lot of people that are in denial of whatever trauma that they had as children, because to them it's not trauma. They don't recognize it as trauma. It's their norm. It's something that they grew up with, and they have no other barometer to judge. So it's their normal. And I cannot tell you how many people have told me that they have had no trauma in their life. And it's not until we start digging that we realize that maybe their parents couldn't keep a job. Maybe they had to transfer schools 2-3 times a year. Maybe there was, incestuous behavior in the household, whatever. A lot of people are in denial and they don't realize that this stuff has contributed to where they are today in terms of their laundry list traits. So the laundry list is the first place that I have most people start looking at if they are appropriate for this fellowship, looking at the laundry list and seeing how many that they can identify with. I had somebody one night smile and tell me that after reviewing the laundry list, it was the very first time in his life he's ever scored 100 on a test. Obviously, ACA was a good home for him. And a lot of people, look at it and think, maybe I have a codependency problem, but, my dad didn't drink. There was no drug use in the house. I came from a pretty normal family. And as they say in Al-Anon, normal is a setting on your dryer. We really don't know what normal is because we don't know how to judge it from other people. So in the beginning, we identify with the 14 traits, and then kind of that's the outer layer of the onion. And as we start to get into the reading, get into the meetings, we start to see that maybe those layers are just the outer, and there's much more deeper hurts, resentments, and core beliefs that are inside there. And then we move into the solution. The process that I like to work on the solution is, number one, identifying with the laundry list traits. 2, realizing that the healing begins once we risk moving out of our isolation. 3, when we learn to keep the focus on ourselves in the here and the now, and that we realize that this is a program of action. The solution says this is a spiritual program of action coming from love, and we have to put action into the program, because if we don't, we become very self-actualized, but we don't seem to grow. And then in the end, we progress from hurting to healing to helping. And as a lot of you that know me know that I believe that the healing process is very, very painful. And it's one of the reasons we can tell that we're actually getting better is because we are feeling the pain. And that's actually a good sign, as painful as it might be, that we're moving in the right direction. A lot of people, when they enter ACA, they come in with a lot of bitterness, a lot of heartache, a lot of pain. And for a lot of people, they don't understand, why me? Why are my parents so narcissistic? Why do my parents put alcohol or drugs before me? Why did I end up in this family? And I think there's a lot of needing to blame and to lash out because of all the hurt that we have. And I think that's normal to come in with the blame game, but we need to move past that. And ACA, the big red book says we need to name it, not blame it. And part of getting through the pain is once we can get through the blame and start looking at really what's happening inside ourselves, how are we affected by these things that we are hurting over, and then how do we learn to heal from that? We need to speak our truth, but in time, I think we need to put more action into what we're talking about and becoming our own loving parents. In ACA, what I've seen a lot of times, the message of working a program of action gets drowned out because a lot of people are fearful. A lot of people are stuck in the don't talk, don't feel, don't trust. And we want to treat people with kid gloves. We don't want people to feel abused. We do not want to recreate any type of criticism or abandonment. Yet at the same time, I think we still need to support each other in keeping the focus on ourselves in the here and now. We can spend decades in program complaining about alcoholic parents or alcoholic spouses, but if we are trying to heal ourselves without having any sponsor or guidance, I think we can be stuck in that part. And it's so important to keep the focus on ourselves. And I know for myself, one of the really hardest things in program was realizing that no one owes me anything. I really wanted to feel validated. I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to feel righted for all the wrongs that had happened to me. But in reality, I think one of the biggest healing things for me was realizing that nobody owes me any of that stuff. If I want validation, if I want support, if I want love, the place that it has to come from is it has to come from my own loving parent. And I really do believe that at the very, very simplest core of ACA, if you want to take the whole fellowship, everything, the whole red book, all the workbooks, and condense it, the two things that are the core of ACA are the sentence, the solution is to become your own loving parent, and the ACA Serenity Prayer. I think all the rest is filler. If you can live in the Serenity Prayer and acting as your own loving parent, you're living the life of step 12. I honestly believe that. And I think being a program of action, we really need to look at, are we only doing virtual ACA meetings? Are we only logging in and listening? Are we actually participating? Do we leave our camera off? Do we try to keep ourselves safe for years and years and getting an earful of recovery, yet not really risking moving out of our isolation? And once again, I think this is where we need to look at, are we stuck in the problem or are we actually moving for the solution? I know some people who love self-help books. They are wanting to find out that the best thing that's going to help them get better, and they read book after book after book, and they have an earful and a head full of recovery, but they never put any of what they've learned into application. They're always on to finding out what the next book is. And I think this is a trap that some of us can fall into with this. Part of becoming our own loving parent is moving out of our head and getting into our heart and trying to find real life support and not just keeping it with the superficial level of maybe just telephone meetings or virtual meetings. One of the things that I really enjoy doing with my fellow travelers, the ones that are local, is to have fellowship with them. And the fellowship can be just going out for Denny's afterwards. It could be going kayaking with them. It can be going camping with them. But at that point in time, we all become real people in real world situations. And we don't need to be camping and talking program the whole time. We can be just ourselves and nurturing ourselves and loving ourselves and taking everything that we've learned in the fellowship and program, but put that into application. And I really do think that those friendships for myself are the most sincere and the most rewarding. I always go back to, real life meetings versus support meetings. ACA can be confusing too, because there's the red book. There are 3 workbooks. There's the daily affirmations. Some meetings use the old ACA book. Some meetings use John Bradshaw. And there's also the whole stigma about sponsorship. And like I said, with AA and Al-Anon, it was very imperative to have sponsors. And people that I've worked with, or friends actually, that have come over from other fellowships into ACA, tell me that out of all the literature they've read, the big red book is by far the deepest, nicest, richest book for them. But they say that ACA for them happens to be the weakest fellowship because there's not the strength of the sponsorship. And I'm trying to do everything I can to try to get people to become sponsors and help strengthen the fellowship with having more sponsors to guide people. I know in ACA, the talk has been for years that, we've been abused. We don't need another person in our life being critical and telling us what to do. But I like to think of a sponsor as actually somebody who can model to us what a loving parent is, somebody that has worked their recovery and is to a place where they're at that serenity, at that emotional maturity, emotional recovery, where they can model the loving parent to us and be somebody to guide us through and not be that critical person to put a schedule and tell us what we have to do. I think we can have really strong sponsors in our fellowship that are also nurturing and supportive. I always think of a sponsor as a friend in a helicopter. You might have the literature, you might have the workbooks, which are like being lost in a forest and you have the map, you have the guide to help you out of the forest. But if all the paths look very similar and you're still confused, wouldn't it be great if you had a friend in a helicopter above you who can see things a little bit clearly, who knows what it's like to go through the forest, knows what it's like to maybe be tired or thirsty or hungry and be discouraged and want to give up. They know what it's like to do that. They've also been through it themselves, and they're above you and they're looking down and they can see the path a little clearer than you can to offer the guidance and support and nurturing to help you through it, so that you then can be the person to help the next person along who needs help getting out of that emotional forest. And I know people that they want to do things on their own, or they feel that all they need is prayer and meditation, and that is enough to help them through that. And you don't have action if all you're doing is praying and meditating. And for that, I always like to tell the story about the two rowboats and the helicopter. There's a man, he lives in a very flat area, and he hears that a big, huge flood is going to come. And he's standing in his front yard as the waters are rising. He's up to his waist in water, and a rowboat comes along, and the guy says, "Here, get in the boat. I'm going to take you to higher ground and take you to safety." And the guy says, "You know what? I have faith in my higher power that I'm going to be rescued. So I'm okay. I'm good. Don't question my faith." The next day, he's looking out at his second-story window. The waters have risen that much. Another person in a rowboat comes along and says, "Here, let me get you to safety." And he says, "Are you questioning my faith? Are you questioning my belief in my higher power that I'm going to be saved and rescued?" Next day, sitting on the peak of the roof of his house, and a helicopter comes by and lowers the ladder and says, "Please get on, I will save you." Once again, the guy says, "My faith is strong." Fourth day, he's meeting his higher power. And he says, "What happened? I had faith in you." And his higher power said, "I sent you two rowboats and a helicopter. What more did you want?" The rowboats and the helicopter, these are the big red book, the meetings, the telephone, the internet, whatever it is you need to do, putting the recovery in action. I think we risk moving out of isolation when we push ourselves to do some things that are uncomfortable, whether it be raise our hand at a meeting to speak, or to read, or to take on a commitment. These are all baby steps that help us get out of our isolation and move into a healthier, happier place. The role of a sponsor is to share their experience, strength, and clarity. It's not to have you wash their car. It's not to have you meet them at every single meeting that they go to and have their schedule. It's just for them to model being a nurturing, loving parent and to guide you through your journey to become that place. And I realized that, we all walk into the program with the don't talk. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to get in touch with my feelings. It hurts too much. And in order for me to talk and to feel, I would have to trust, and things are too scary. And I realized that coming into therapy, coming into ACA, every fiber of our being basically says, don't talk, feel, and trust. So this is how we have to start coming out of isolation. And I like to tell everybody that trust is not a light switch that's off or on. Trust is more like a dimmer switch. You have to work on building trust. It doesn't happen overnight. And different relationships, we trust differently. You might have the most awesome babysitter in the world that you would trust with your kids without a doubt, but you might not trust your babysitter to work on your car any more than you would trust your greatest mechanic to stay with your children. So we trust different people in different ways at different levels, and we have to realize that. When people tell me that they don't trust at all, I always ask them, well, did you drive here today? How did you get through an intersection if the light was green, if you don't trust that the oncoming cars are going to stop while you've got the green? Obviously, we have some inherent level of trust that we need to tap into and start turning that dimmer switch up a little bit as necessary and as needed, because otherwise we stay in isolation. And with the sponsorship, it's like I said, it's really hard. There's some meetings that have a lot of sponsors, or some meetings that don't have many sponsors. I've been at meetings where there are people that are sponsors, but I look at them and they don't have the type of recovery that I would want to have. So it's really hard to get a sponsor. And I tell people to go to as many meetings as possible and keep your eyes and ears open until you find somebody who has what you want. And that's where you raise your hand and take the first step to try to get to know that person. Maybe not even ask them if they would be a sponsor, but just get to know them. Maybe start with a temporary, or start with the fellow traveler model until you're sure that this is somebody that can guide you. But the experience is very enriching and very worthwhile. And hopefully the sponsor is going to be somebody that is not going to be like a critical sponsor telling you exactly what you have to do, how you have to do it, and in the pace that they want you to do it. Hopefully this is somebody that is going to give you the gentleness and the balance to help you be as successful as possible in working the steps. And if you're somebody who's dealing with some deep-seated trauma, the steps probably aren't going to be enough. You probably need some type of trauma-related therapy like EMDR to help you to get rid of the stuff that's actually programmed inside your amygdala, inside your brain, the way the fight, flight, freeze response is actually programmed into us as a kid. The steps are great, but they don't necessarily help with the deep-seated trauma like that. But that in itself would be like a whole other presentation. And I know I've talked in here before about the Loving Parent Guidebook, and that is another forum to work on healing trauma. I'd like to talk a little bit about demystifying the 12 steps for a few minutes, because I know in the office where I work, we got them on the board in a big, huge banner. People walk into that room and they see them, and it's this kind of monolithic cult-like looking thing. And a lot of people look at that and they're immediately turned off by the steps, or they see the word God and maybe they don't believe in God. Maybe they are a victim of religious abuse growing up, and there's a big turnoff with that. And I do not want people to be turned off by the steps at all. I want people to see how helpful they are, and how resisting the steps because feeling that it's a cult or something like that is only going to prevent the healing cycle. And as far as a cult is concerned, I do say, yeah, ACA, AA, all these, whatever the alphabet soup is, they are kind of cultish. But then so is congregating with people where you're just doing nothing but trauma bonding, or bonding because you drink together. I mean, all those things can be seen as cults too. So why not look at something that maybe is a cult that might be good for you? And as far as the steps are concerned, I like to think of the steps as a ladder. I like to think of the steps as a 12-rung ladder, taking you up to the top. And what's waiting for you at the top of the ladder is serenity, or emotional recovery, as it's called in ACA. And my version of emotional recovery is not getting butt hurt over stupid shit. I think when we reach this place of serenity, we get to this place where we can learn to not sweat the small stuff. And life is much, much better at that point of view. With this ladder, I want to start with saying that before we come into any kind of recovery, before we come into 12 steps, before we come into therapy, usually we came out of an environment where there was some level of stress and tension. And I like to think of this stress and tension as like we are swimming in a pool of muck. And we've been in this pool of muck our entire life. So it is our norm. It is what we expect. It's what we know. We feel out of place if we are not in this muck, and we feel warm and comfortable here. We might complain about it. Others might complain about it, but this is our home and this is where we feel safe. So recovery is about climbing the ladder out of the muck to get to that place of serenity. And I don't know if anybody here has ever gone swimming off the coast or in a lake or gone kayaking, but I know one of the docks where I kayak off the coast, there's a ladder, and the ladder actually goes into the water. And if you're getting out of your kayak, you don't grab the first rung that you see. You actually put your foot in the rung that's underwater to get out of the boat to lift yourself up. If you try to second guess and go up too high, you're more likely to be unstable and you're going to tip over and fall in the water. And the reason I say this is because I think steps 1 and 2 in recovery are actually in the muck. You really can't see them. You have to kind of just trust that they're there and grab onto the first rung. And when you grab onto the first rung and you stand up on it, your head is now above the muck. You're still standing in the muck, but you have a view now. And with this view, you can see the muck. And step 1, in my terms, is, holy crap, I've been swimming in muck. And this is where we start to come out of our denial. This is where we start to see the unmanageability of our life and what the muck really is. Because prior to that, it's our norm, it's all we know. So step 1, high enough out of the muck to see it a little bit clearly and saying, holy crap, I'm in the muck. Step 2 is realizing, as we're a little bit farther out of the muck, that we need this ladder. This ladder is helping. This ladder is helping us get out of the muck. We can't walk out of this muck on our own. We need something. And whether that be a higher power or God, I tell people it can also be this ladder. As long as you have hold of this ladder is what can get you to the place of serenity. And then at step 3, you're finally at that rung that's out of the muck. You're now standing out of the muck and you're holding onto the ladder. And at step 3, you realize, wow, as long as I hold on to this ladder, I can climb out of this muck. The comfort of knowing, as long as I hold on to it. There's also a thing called gravity. And I also know that at any time, if I let go of this ladder, guess what? I fall right back in the muck. So holding on to the ladder means everything. When you reach the 4th rung of the ladder, step 4, this is where we take our inventory, whether you take the standard inventory or you take the fearless and blameless inventory of your parents, whichever inventory you're working with your sponsor or your step book, is you're taking a break at this step. This step's a little bit wider to give you a little bit of time out to rest. And actually, going back a step, I like people to stay in step 3 for about 2 or 3 months. I really think that people need to realize that they have to hold on to this ladder, because letting go of the ladder is saying, I don't need the ladder. I can do this on my own. I can pull the control back. I know what's best for me. And unfortunately, usually when we pull the control back, we end up back where we started. So I like people to spend about 2 or 3 months just noticing how they are putting walls up and barriers resisting the therapy and the growth that they're fighting for. And when they get to a place where the trust levels are a little bit higher, they're willing now to accept some trust, willing to come out of some isolation. This is where we go to the 4th rung of the ladder. And the 4th run, where we take a break, we're taking a break because we're carrying this backpack around with us. And this backpack that we've been carrying our whole life. Maybe we didn't even know it, but we've been adding bricks and boulders and muck and crud to this. And when we're not looking, other people are adding bricks and boulders and muck to our backpack. So step 4 is when we can take a break and start looking at that backpack and take an inventory of what crud are we carrying with us and what crud do we want to let go of? Because guess what? We can take it out, throw it back to the muck, let that go to where it came from so that we can lighten our load. And once we do that, in step 5, we're actually sharing with another person what the inventory of our backpack is, what we've let go of and what we maybe are working at continuing to let go of. In step 6, the 6th rung on the ladder, this is where we are looking at our character defects and our laundry list survival traits that we are still actively engaged in that are no longer working for us. And being able to identify those and start to make peace with those. This is where we start to be, more gentle with ourselves as our own loving parents, in realizing that these things about us that maybe we don't like have protected us and have helped us. And that if we don't need them any longer, we can start to let these fade away. And that's kind of step 7, is working on self-forgiveness, letting go of these shortcomings as a means of removing them, because by accepting and forgiving ourselves for who we are, we don't necessarily need these traits any longer. And I always say that the goal of ACA is to make your laundry list obsolete. To look at that list instead of saying that I relate to 1, I relate to 2, I relate to 3, to look at that and say, someday I used to do that. That used to be me. But to make your laundry list obsolete. So we really work hard on that in steps 6 and 7. Step 8 is our harms inventory, and step 9 is making amends when necessary. And I know this is a lot different in the other fellowships than it is in ACA. Step 10 is continuing to check on where we are in our journey, continuing to make sure that we're on course with the ladder, to make sure that we are working on removing any tension that we have with a critical voice or critical parent inside of us, our own means of rebelliousness, that we're learning how to become gentle with ourselves and become our own loving parent. And when we make mistakes, to be able to, instead of criticize and shame ourselves because of that, to instantly acknowledge them, put our best foot forward, and keep moving up the ladder. Step 11 is to continue working on staying in the moment. So often we get triggered and we will react to somebody like we used to react to our mom, our dad, our principal, our grandparent, whoever it is. And we're not in the moment then. We're reacting to somebody from the past. We're shadow boxing with a ghost from the past. And step 11 reminds us to stay connected in the moment, in the here and now. And step 12, when we get up to the top of the ladder, this is where we share our experience, hope, and clarity with other people so that they can benefit as well. So I've covered the ACA basics, the fellowship, the sponsorship, the steps. The Loving Parent Guidebook is a huge part of the fellowship. I actually use it in therapy because it is therapy. And this is where, ACA has been moving a little bit farther away from being just a typical 12-step fellowship into having other therapeutic elements to itself. But I'm not really going to talk about the LPG in this one because that's a whole other topic in itself. And if I could review my solution once again, which is in a nutshell, the paraphrase version of the solution, my solution is to become my own loving parent. I work a spiritual program based on action coming from love. The healing began when I risked moving out of isolation, and I learned to keep the focus on myself in the here and now. I take responsibility for my own life and supply my own parenting with gentleness, humor, love, and respect. And I know I need to close this up with the ACA Serenity Prayer, which is also, as I said, the second most important element for me in the ACA Fellowship, and that is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one I can, and the wisdom to know that one is me. Thank you for letting me share.